Good morning. In my last post, we learned to download SketchUp, install it, set up the toolbars, and create a custom template. The window you see in front of you is the result. I just opened it up. It brought up our custom template and gave us the toolbars we wanted and the view, the isometric view. Today I'm going to show you how to use some of the basic tools. I'll introduce you to groups and components, show you the difference between them and why I prefer components over groups, give you an introduction to the SketchUp menu, and in particular we will look at some of the most commonly used dialog boxes and how to get them. So let's get started. When you first open up SketchUp, the line tool is automatically selected. This is the line tool, the pencil, and it's used for drawing simple lines. You could start anywhere. You might start at the origin, draw a line anywhere in 3D space. Let's just draw a line like this and let's see what it looks like. I'm going to hit escape. If I keep going, you can continue to click like this and create more and more lines. I'm going to hit escape to stop that sequence and look at this from the front. Now we're looking at it from the front. We don't see anything, and the reason is everything I drew is in the red-green plane. If I looked at it from the top, you would see that. There it is. There are the lines I drew. If I look at it from the side, the blue-green plane, it's also flat. So what I drew was in the red-green plane. Let's look at it again in isometric view. Now, if I want to draw a 3D line, or a line, let's say a line in the red-blue plane, I could click on this and go up the blue axis with the line and click again. Now if I want to draw one in the blue-red plane, I could come out along the red axis and draw another line. And again, if I want to draw one in the blue-green plane, I could click again, go along the green axis. So the line tool is a simple matter of drawing a series of lines, hitting escape to stop the process. Now that we've drawn a couple of lines, let's look at the select tool. Oh, by the way, let's look at this in the front view first. Notice now I have some lines, and when you look at it in the front view, that go up and over, as you might expect given the type of lines we drew. If I look at it in the side view, similar thing. And if I look at it in the top view, we have the top projection of the lines we drew. And if I look at it in the isometric view, I get the 3D view of the lines that we drew. Now let's look at the select tool. The select tool is this little arrow. We'll use it a lot. And you can use it to select individual lines, or you can use it to select a series of lines, and you can do it in two ways. If I start with the select tool, let's say here, click, hold it down, and then move from left to right, everything that's captured within that box, everything that is captured completely within that box will be selected. If I let up on the mouse, you'll see the selection turns blue, like that. However, if I do the same thing, but this time go from right to left, now things that are touched by the selection box will be selected. Notice that all the lines have been selected. So you can use the select key to just select a few things, like that, or to select a bunch of things, like that. There are lots of ways to use the selection tool that I don't have time to cover here, but you will see them in the beginners and intermediate webinars. Let's delete what we have here. Since it's all selected, since all of these lines are selected, I can hit the delete key and delete all of that. Let's use another tool, the box or the rectangle tool. start at the origin, click, drag it out to whatever dimension we want, or just leave it float here. Do not click, leave it float, and type in the dimension we want. Let's say I want a box that's 3 inches by 4 inches. I type 3, 4, enter. I don't need to type the inch units because when we set up our template last week, our default units were inches. The only time I would need to supply the units if I were typing in something other than inches. Now notice I have a box that's 3 inches in this dimension by 4 in that dimension. Suppose I meant for it to be 4 in this dimension and 3 in this dimension. Well, if I don't choose another tool after typing in the 3, 4, I can type 4, 3. And it rearranges the box for me. So in other words, as long as I stay in the tool's context, I don't select another tool, I can reverse the order of the dimensions that I type in, and it reverses how the box looks or the rectangle looks. All right, now let's use one of the most popular of the tools, SketchUp tools, the push-pull. This is the push-pull tool, and with that I can create 3 dimensions. I just pull the box up and type in a dimension. Let's say I want it to be 5 inches. I just type 5, enter. And now I've got a box that's 4 by 3 by 5. By the way, let's go back, collapse this box. Remember I said this is a rectangle 3 by 4? From your high school geometry, you remember that there's such a thing as the 3, 4, 5 right triangle. Well, let's just see what happens here if I use, well, this time I'll use the tape measure tool. And I'll measure this diagonal from here to here. Notice it tells me it's exactly 5 inches, as it should be, because one side is 3, the other side's 4, so the hypotenuse of this right triangle has to be 5 inches. And that's how you use the tape measure tool. There are other ways to use the tape measure tool that we'll get into in a second. I'll hit escape, and I'll go back to my push-pull tool. Let's say I want this now to be, 5 3/8 tall instead of 5. Well, I simply type 5 space 3/8, enter. And now it's 5 3/8 tall. If I instead wanted it to be 5 3/4, I could type, and still can because I haven't changed context, I can type 5.75. And now if I take the tape measure tool, I can check this out, and it's 5 3/4 inches tall, even though I typed 5.75. So you can mix up your methods for dimensioning from fractions to decimals, even within the same, let's say you're doing a rectangle and it was 3 by 4.5. You could type in 3, 4.5, or you could type in 3, 4 space 1/2. Either way, it understands. Now, I've been typing these numbers in, and you notice I have not had to place my cursor anywhere. And that's because this box down here, called the value control box, is context sensitive. It knows what I'm trying to do, and it knows what type of unit I should be typing in here. This name that precedes the value control box will change depending on what I'm trying to do. Suppose I want to measure the angle between this edge and this edge. I could take the protractor, hold it on top until it turns blue, and then click on this point. Come out here along the red axis, or along this line actually, right there. Click again. Notice that the VCB down here is now looking for an angle. Well, you can either type an angle in, or it'll tell you what the angle is when you click over here. Notice it told me that that angle was 90 degrees. So the value control box is context sensitive. It knows what to look for. It also knows what to tell you based on the tool you're using. Let's use the circle tool. Suppose I wanted to put a round extension on this. One of the things I could do is find the midpoint of this line. Well, I want the circle to be in the red-green plane, so I can hold it over the red-green plane, then hold the Shift key down so it holds that orientation. Then bring it over here to the middle of that line. Click once. Bring it out to the edge. Click again. And now I've got a circle, a semicircle. Actually, I have a circle. If I take the orbit tool right here, look underneath, I've got a complete circle. I don't want this part of the circle, so I'm going to use the eraser tool to erase that part of the circle. Then I'm going to use the orbit tool to come around, like this. Use the push-pull tool to come up to the top. Click. Use the eraser tool to erase that line. Orbit tool to look underneath. Eraser tool to erase that line. And there you go. Now I have a box with a rounded end. Often you want to view this thing up close or fill the whole screen with it. Another handy tool is the zoom extents. When you hit zoom extents, it'll take the current view and fill the screen with it, like that. I can always get to the previous view with this previous tool, or bring it back again like that. So I can step backwards any number of times and step forwards any number of times. The pan tool, well, let me step back. The pan tool can be used to pan things up or down, right or left. I already demonstrated the orbit tool. And if you have a thumb wheel on your mouse and turn the thumb wheel, you can zoom in or out. If you hold the thumb wheel down while you move the mouse, you have the orbit tool. So that's some of the basic tools that you will encounter when you go to the Beginner's SketchUp webinar. Now I want to cover a few of the, well, first of all, let's cover the differences between groups and components. I'm going to erase this dotted line I have here by deleting guides under the Edit menu. And choose the Select tool, and I'm going to look at the components here. I notice that I've got lines like this. I've got an arc here and here. And I've got faces. These are called primitives. When a component is in its primitive state, it is subject to being attacked. And how can it be attacked? It can be attacked by a line touching it that is not intended to touch it or is not intended to be part of it. For instance, if I were to take another line and accidentally draw it in such a way that it crosses this line, any one of these lines, like that, that becomes a part of this, and it's difficult to separate it from the rest of this. So there are two methods for protecting this part. Let me step back. One is called making it a group, and the other is called making it a component. And I can do either by triple clicking anywhere on this part. I'll triple click on this face, and then right click. Notice when I triple click, all the primitives are selected. All the lines, the arcs, the faces, all the primitives are selected. If I now right click, I have the choice of making this a group or making it a component. Making it a group protects it. And what I mean by that is I can no longer change this or add anything to it unless I choose it and go into edit group mode. In which case, it'll give me a bounding box that says these are the things that I can change inside this bounding box, and I can do anything I want. I can go in here and change this in any way I want. But as long as I'm outside of this bounding box and I'm not in edit component mode, and I can do that by just clicking outside of this box, this is protected. It's a group. When you select it now, instead of selecting a single line or a single face, you select the whole part. The problem with groups is if you were drawing a table that had 4 legs and you made each one of them a group, your file size is roughly 4 times the size it would be if it only had 1 leg. Further, if I wanted to change the leg, I would have to change all 4 legs because they're independent things. However, if I were to make this a component, neither of those would be true. If I had 4 legs, the file size would remain roughly the same size, and if I wanted to change 1 leg, all 4 would change at the same time. So I highly recommend you never use groups. Just avoid using groups. Let's explode this. Let's choose it, right click, explode. That returns it to its primitive state. Notice I can select all the individual lines now. And let's again triple click on it, 1, 2, 3, so that it selects all of the primitives. And now make it a component. A dialog box comes up called Create Component, and I give this a name. I can call it anything I want. I'll call this Rounded Box. And now I have a component called Rounded Box. And if I were to make another one, and I'll just copy this. To copy things, you use the copy tool. Let me hit escape. That's the copy tool. It's called the move tool, but it's also the copy tool. It's move tool if I use it the way it is right now. That moves it. But if I click the control key until the cursor gets a little plus sign, now I can copy things. So that's what I'll do. I'll copy this a few times. There we go. And now I'm going to change it. Again, I select it, go into edit, this time edit component mode because it's not a group, it's a component. And I'm just going to pull this side out a little bit. Notice all 4 of them changing? That wouldn't happen with a group. If these were groups, only this one would change and these would remain the same. All right, now I'm going to very quickly go through some of the more often used dialog boxes. Model info, we went through last week. That's how you set up your template. By the way, I should say that all dialog boxes can be found under the Windows menu. Entity info we dealt with last week when we set up, I'm sorry, not entity info. Preferences. Preferences we set up last week when we created our template. But the other interesting boxes are the entity info, which tells us about the component, It tells us which layer it's on, what the definition or component name is. And if I wanted to give each one of these 4 components a unique name, I could put a unique name in here. I might call this one the left back rounded box. I might call this one the right back rounded box, this one the left front rounded box, and the right front rounded box. And that would go in here, and it would give each one of these a unique name while still having the same component name, rounded box. So that's the entity info. You would use that a lot. Components is a library. Every component you make in your model will go into the library. And it'll go into the in-model library. This is the outside the model library. If you want to look at the in-model library, you notice we have a rounded box component. I could take one and dump it out here like that as many times as I want. And as many of these as I put out there, all I really have in the file is just this component that's in the library. So even though I've got 6 of these out here, my file size is not 6 times as large. It's simply as large as this component with a tiny pointer that says put one here, 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 and here. So my file size stays small. And like I said, anytime I change one of these, whether I change it, well, anytime I change one of these, all 6 will change, as well as the model in the library will change. So that's the components library. The layers you will use a lot. Right now all of these are on layer 0. I'm going to change this by adding a layer, and I'm going to say, I'll call this back, and I'll create another one called front. And now if I want to choose, let's say, let me get my select tool out here, and I'll choose these 4, and I'll put those on the back layer. I'll choose these 2, and I'll put those on the front layer. Now notice that if I make the back layer invisible, those on the back layer are invisible. Same thing with the front layer. So you use the layers box a lot. The other one you'll use a lot is the scenes dialog box, but I'm not going to show you that right now. You're going to learn that in the beginners webinar. Oh, there's one other thing I want to show you before I stop here, is how you can stack these dialog boxes, especially, in a case where when I create these videos, I got a very small screen. Notice that if I click this bar up here, the dialog box shrinks. I can get back to it anytime I want by clicking it again. And I can come back and do that. Well, I can also stack these. So suppose I want to have 3 or 4 of them handy at all times. I can come in here and open the model info. Let me open the entity info. I can drag it down here and stack it with that one. Now when I move these, 2 of them move at the same time. I can open either one of them. I can go get another one. Let's say the scenes. Stack that just by bringing it over here and touching it. And now I can move all 3 of them. This allows me either to keep them on screen down in a corner or move them off screen a little bit if I want, and then bring them back on whenever I want. And so that's a method for stacking these layers and getting them out of the way. The other thing I wanted to mention is anytime you want to get rid of these axes, well, not get rid of them, but make them invisible, you can go to View and uncheck the axis. That removes the axis from the scene. You can get it back by checking it again. There's the context menu will appear anytime you right-click on something. It's a very long one right now and goes off screen. You can't see all of it. But the context menu will change depending on what you're doing and what you click on. Which is why it's called context menu, because depending on the context of what you're doing, there will be a number of things that you can choose from the context menu. Another handy little dialog box, I don't use it much, but if you're a beginner and you get into a little trouble, you might want to choose the instructor dialog box under Window. And that will open up this little help menu, and you can choose a tool. Over here on the left, if you choose the rectangle tool, help for the rectangle tool comes up. If you choose the arc tool, help for the arc tool comes up. And so if you get into trouble and you forgot how to use one of these things, just go to Window and choose the instructor tool, and it will give you some quick help. Okay, that's it. Next week we're going to cover how to find, locate plugins, how to download them and install them and use them. And in particular, I have a number of plugins that you should install if you're going to use my beginner's webinar or my advanced webinar. And I'll go over those. So until next week, have a good week.